237 years ago, the galaxy had faced the end of everything. The void wraiths came from the empty space between galaxies, moving like a disease across the stars. They were not like any enemy the galactic races had fought before. They did not want territory or resources. They wanted to consume everything that existed. Where the void wraiths passed, entire star systems simply stopped being, not destroyed or conquered, but erased as if they had never existed at all. The stars went dark. The planets turned to dust. Even the space between worlds became empty and cold. The Galactic Council had mobilized everything they had. Every fleet, from every member world, joined the fight. The hegemony sent their massive battle cruisers, each one the size of a small moon. The Iron Brotherhood contributed their robot armies that felt no fear and needed no rest. The Zephyrians created weapons that could crack planets in half with pure energy. It was not enough. System after system fell to the void wraiths. The enemy moved faster than anyone thought possible. They attacked from directions that should not have existed. Their ships passed through solid matter like it was empty space, then became solid just long enough to destroy everything around them. Refugee ships clogged every hyperspace route as entire civilizations ran for their lives. The inner world struggled to house billions of displaced beings. Panic spread faster than the void wraiths themselves as species that had survived for millions of years faced the very real possibility that they would simply cease to exist. Their war had been going badly for 3 years when the Earthship venture stumbled into history. Captain Jake Morrison was 34 years old and had been exploring space for only 6 months. His species had just figured out how to travel faster than light. The humans were so new to space travel that most galactic races did not even know they existed. The venture was not a warship. It carried survey equipment and scientific instruments. Its crew of 47 humans had signed up to explore new worlds and make first contact with alien species. They had not expected to find a war that was destroying the entire galaxy. Morrison and his crew were mapping star systems in the outer rim when their sensors detected 3 massive objects moving through space. The objects were heading toward a small colony world that housed about 2 million beings from various species. "Sir, those ships are not responding to any communication attempts," reported Lieutenant Kevin Walsh from the communications station. "They are not broadcasting any identification signals." "What about their design?" Morrison asked. "Do they match any known species in our database?" Ensign Maria Santos checked her screens. "Negative, Captain. I have never seen anything like them. The ships appear to be made of some kind of dark matter. Our sensors can barely detect them." Morrison ordered his ship closer to get a better look. What they saw made no sense to any of them. The 3 ships looked like pieces of space itself had been cut out and shaped into weapons. They moved without any visible engines. They made no sound even when the Venture's sensitive equipment should have picked up their engine noise. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Commander Rick Jones from the tactical station, "those ships are opening fire on the colony world." Morrison watched in horror as beams of pure darkness struck the planet's surface. Where the beams touched, everything simply disappeared. Mountains, oceans, cities, all gone as if they had never existed. The planet itself began to shrink as huge chunks of it were erased from reality. "Red alert," Morrison ordered. "All hands, to battle stations." "Sir," Lieutenant Walsh said, "we are not equipped for combat. Our weapons are designed for clearing asteroids and mining operations." "Those ships are killing 2 million innocent people," Morrison replied. "We are the only ones here who can help them." The humans had no idea they were about to face the galaxy's most feared enemy. They did not know that every major military force had failed to stop the void wraiths. They only knew that people were dying and they were the only ones who could try to help. The Venture charged toward the 3 void wraith destroyers. Morrison's crew armed their simple mining lasers and loaded their basic kinetic projectiles. By galactic standards, they were attacking with tools rather than weapons. "Target the largest ship," Morrison ordered. "All weapons, continuous fire." What happened next defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. The humans did not try to match the void wraiths' advanced technology. They did not attempt to understand their enemy's tactics or find weak points in their defenses. They simply attacked with everything they had and refused to stop. The Venture's mining lasers struck the lead Void Wraith ship. The beams should have passed right through the enemy vessel like every other weapon the galaxy had tried. Instead, they cut deep gouges in the ship's hull. "Direct hit," reported Lieutenant Commander Jones. "The enemy ship is showing damage." "How is that possible?" asked Ensign Santos. "I do not know and I do not care," Morrison answered. "Keep firing." The kinetic projectiles fired by the Venture were simple chunks of metal accelerated to high speed. They were crude weapons that most galactic races had stopped using thousands of years ago, but when they struck the Void Wraith ships, they punched holes right through their hulls. The three enemy vessels tried to use their phase-shifting ability to avoid the human weapons. They turned their ships into pure energy and attempted to pass through solid matter. But something about the human weapons prevented this. Every shot found its target. Morrison realized that his crew had found something important. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison of the Earth vessel Venture. The enemy ships can be damaged by kinetic weapons and high-energy lasers. Repeat, conventional weapons are effective against these targets." But there were no other ships to hear his message. The Venture was alone against three enemies that had destroyed entire fleets. The Void Wraiths began to focus their attacks on the small human ship. Beams of pure destruction lanced out toward the Venture. Morrison ordered evasive maneuvers, pushing his ship's engines beyond their design limits. "Hull breach on Deck 3, reported Chief Engineer Amy Parker over the intercom. "We are losing atmosphere." "Seal it off," Morrison ordered. "All non-essential crew to emergency stations." The battle continued for 6 hours. The small human ship darted around the much larger Void Wraith vessels, striking them with weapons that should not have worked. Morrison's crew fought with a determination that surprised even themselves. They were not trained soldiers. They were explorers and scientists. But they refused to retreat while innocent people were being killed. Finally, after taking massive damage, the three Void Wraith ships did something they had never done before in the entire war. They retreated. The ships that had never shown fear or hesitation turned away from the small human vessel and disappeared into the darkness between stars. Morrison stared at his tactical display in disbelief. "Did we just win?" "I think we did, sir," replied Lieutenant Commander Jones. When the Galactic Council's rescue fleet arrived 2 days later, they found the impossible. 3 Void Wraith ships destroyed or driven off by a single primitive vessel, crewed by a species that had just learned to travel between stars. The galaxy would never be the same. The Great Hall stretched as far as the eye could see. Black stone walls rose up into darkness covered with banners from hundreds of different worlds. Each banner told the story of a race that had earned its place among the stars. Some showed symbols of creatures with too many arms. Others displayed shapes that hurt to look at directly. A few carried images of beings made of pure light or living metal. The Galactic War Council met in this hall whenever the galaxy faced its greatest threats. Today was one of those days. Representatives from 473 different species had gathered. The Zephyrians floated above the ground in balls of blue energy, their crystal bodies singing soft notes that translated into words. The massive Kralix delegates sat on reinforced platforms that groaned under their weight. Each Kralix warrior stood 3 times taller than most other beings and had skin like rock. Near the back, the insect-like hive queens clicked and buzzed to each other in their ancient language. Their translation devices turned the sounds into words that others could understand. The queens had ruled their corner of space for 10,000 years and had never lost a war. In the center of the Great Hall sat a table made from the core of a dead star. The metal was so dense that gravity bent slightly around it. 12 chairs surrounded the table, each one built to hold the galaxy's greatest military leaders. These were the beings who decided when entire star systems would live or die. Admiral Kextar of the Hegemony Fleet leaned back in his chair. His forearms moved constantly as he spoke, a habit from his species that showed either deep thought or great anger. Today it was anger. 17 systems lost in just one solar cycle, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. The Devourers grow stronger with each world they consume. We need every tactical mind, every strategic advantage we can find. The other military leaders nodded. They had all seen the reports. Entire planets stripped bare of life. Stars going dark as the devourers, fed on their energy. Refugee ships filling every spaceport in the inner systems. We have called upon every warrior race, said General Thex of the Iron Brotherhood. His metal body sparked as he spoke. Every fleet answers our call. Every weapon maker works day and night to arm our forces. Then why? Admiral Kextar continued. Do we continue to honor an empty seat? All eyes turned to the 13th chair at the war table. Unlike the others, no one sat in it. No nameplate marked who it belonged to. No banner hung above it. Yet every being in the hall knew exactly what that empty chair meant. It belonged to the humans of Earth. The humans had never attended a single War Council meeting. They had never answered an invitation to join the galactic government. Most of the time, they acted like the rest of the galaxy did not even exist. They stayed in their small corner of space around their yellow star and minded their own business. War Premier Yul Nara of the Ascended Collective had been quiet during the discussion. She was old, even by the standards of her long-lived species. Her skin had turned the deep blue color that marked her as having lived for over 3 centuries. She had commanded fleets when most of the other council members were still young. Admiral Kextar, she said finally, how long have you held your position? 47 years, he replied with pride. I have led the hegemony fleet through 6 major conflicts. And you, General Thex? 32 years of service to the Iron Brotherhood, the metal being answered. Yul Nara looked around the table at each military leader. I see. Then none of you were present during the Void War. The Great Hall fell silent. Even the constant background noise of translation devices stopped working as their operators focused on Yul Nara's words. The Void War was history now. Ancient history to most of the younger species. It had happened over 200 years ago, before most of the current leaders were even born, but those who remembered it never forgot. The Void War ended before I was hatched, admitted Admiral Kextar. But I have read all the historical records. The Council mobilized every available ship and defeated the Void Wraiths through superior tactics and unified command. Several of the older beings in the hall made sounds that could have been laughter or crying. Yul Nara shook her head slowly. The historical records were edited for public consumption, she said. The real reports are sealed in the deepest archives, accessible only to war premiers and those of equivalent rank. She touched a control on her chair and a holographic display appeared above the table. It showed a simple star chart with a yellow star marked in red. The Void Wraiths were not defeated by superior tactics or unified command, Yul Nara continued. They were defeated by a species that had just learned to travel between stars, a species that fought with weapons we considered primitive and tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The display changed to show a small spacecraft. It looked crude compared to the sleek vessels used by the major galactic powers. Its hull was covered with patches and modifications. Its weapons were simple projectile launchers and basic energy beams. This is the Earth Vessel Venture, Yul Nara said. Crew of 47 humans. It was conducting a routine survey mission when it encountered a Void Wraith scout fleet. Another image appeared showing 3 massive black ships. The Void Wraiths had built vessels that looked like they were made of space itself. They moved without visible engines and attacked without warning. According to every military doctrine, we had developed over millions of years of warfare. The venture should have been destroyed instantly. The Void Wraiths had never retreated from any engagement. They had never left survivors. They consumed everything they encountered. Yul Nara paused and looked directly at Admiral Kextar. The venture not only survived the encounter, it forced the Void Wraiths to retreat. Gasps and clicking sounds filled the hall. Several species began talking at once in their native languages. The idea was impossible. A single primitive ship forcing the galaxy's greatest threat to run away. When our fastest ships arrived at the battle site, Yul Nara continued. They found something that changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. They found Void Wraith wreckage floating in space. The hall erupted in noise as hundreds of beings tried to process what they had heard. The Void Wraiths had seemed impossible to kill. Their ships regenerated damage faster than conventional weapons could cause it. Their technology was so advanced that most attacks simply passed through them without effect. The human captain, Jake Morrison, filed a simple incident report. When asked how his small ship had defeated 3 Void Wraith destroyers, he gave an answer that still makes military strategists wake up screaming. Yulnara's voice grew quiet, forcing everyone in the hall to listen carefully. He said they attacked us, so we fought back. The news of what happened at the colony world spread through the galaxy faster than the speed of light. A single human ship had done what entire fleets could not. Captain Morrison's report reached the Galactic Council within days, and emergency sessions were called immediately. The Council's military leaders could not believe what they were reading. The report described tactics that went against everything they had learned about warfare over millions of years. The humans had attacked directly, without strategy or planning. They had used primitive weapons that should not have worked. Most, shocking of all, they had won. Within 2 weeks, a council delegation arrived at Earth. They found a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in a quiet corner of the galaxy. The humans had built cities on every continent and had developed technology that was advanced for such a young species, but still primitive by galactic standards. The delegation met with human leaders in a building called the United Nations. The aliens expected to find great military minds and strategic planners. Instead, they found politicians and diplomats who seemed more interested in talking than fighting. Admiral Vex Hari of the Council Fleet spoke for the delegation. "We have come to request assistance in our war against the Void Wraiths. Your species has shown remarkable ability to combat this enemy." President Helen Carter listened carefully to the translation devices. She was 58 years old and had led her country for 6 years. She had dealt with many crises, but never anything like this. "We appreciate your offer to include us in galactic affairs," President Carter replied. "But we are not a military species." Captain Morrison and his crew were explorers, not soldiers. What they did was defend innocent people who were being killed. "That is precisely why we need your help," Admiral Vex Hari said. "Your species fights differently than any we have encountered. You do not retreat when faced with impossible odds." The human leaders discussed the situation for several days. Earth had just learned that it was part of a galaxy filled with intelligent life. Now they were being asked to join a war that threatened to destroy everything that existed. Commander Lisa Hayes was chosen to represent Earth's military forces. She was 39 years old and had served in her country's Navy for 18 years. She had never fought in space, but she understood warfare better than most. Hayes arrived at the war front 3 months later, aboard a converted cargo ship called the Freedom. She brought with her 200 volunteers from Earth's various military forces. They carried weapons that the galactic races considered outdated and wore armor that seemed primitive. The first strategy meeting Hayes attended was held aboard the Council's command ship, a vessel the size of a small city. Representatives from dozens of species gathered around a holographic display showing the current state of the war. General Morthak of the Kralix Empire gestured toward the display with one of his massive arms. "The Void Wraiths have taken the Epsilon sector. We estimate they will reach the inner systems within 6 months if their current advance continues. Our losses have been severe," added Admiral Keshita of the Zephyrian fleet. "We have lost 40% of our ships in the past year alone." Hayes studied the tactical display. The galactic forces were arranged in defensive formations, trying to hold strategic positions while the Void Wraiths advanced. It was textbook military strategy, designed to minimize losses while maximizing defensive advantage. "You are fighting like you want to lose as few ships as possible," Hayes observed. "But the Void Wraiths do not have ships to lose. They have resources to spend. You need to think like them, but with more anger." The alien military leaders looked confused. "Explain," General Morthak requested. Hayes pointed to a section of the display where a large galactic fleet was positioned defensively around a star system. "You have 300 ships protecting this system. The Void Wraiths will send 1,000 ships to attack it. You will fight bravely and retreat when the losses become too heavy. The system will fall and the enemy will grow stronger. What would you suggest instead?" asked Admiral Keshita. Send 50 ships on a direct attack into the heart of their fleet, Hayes replied. Not to win, but to cause as much damage as possible before they are destroyed. While they are focused on that attack, send the other 250 ships to hit their supply lines and support vessels. The alien commanders stared at her in shock. That would be suicide for the 50 ships. In the first wave, General Morthak said. Yes, it would, Hayes agreed. But it would also cripple their fleet and save the system. The crews of those 50 ships would die knowing they had saved millions of lives. Admiral Keshita's crystal body flickered with concern. We cannot ask our people to sacrifice themselves in such a manner. It goes against everything we believe about the value of life. Then you will lose this war, Hayes said simply. The Void Wraiths do not care about individual lives. They care about consuming everything that exists. You cannot fight them with strategies designed for civilized opponents. The first human-led operation took place 2 weeks later. Hayes commanded a mixed fleet of Earth ships and galactic vessels in an attack on a Void Wraith staging area. The galactic commanders watched in horror as human pilots flew their ships directly into enemy formations, trading their lives for tactical advantage. The attack succeeded beyond all expectations. The Void Wraith staging area was completely destroyed, along with the enemy ship stationed there. The galactic forces had won their first major victory in over a year, but the cost troubled the alien commanders. The humans had fought with a ferocity that seemed almost insane. They attacked without regard for their own safety, pursuing objectives that meant certain death for many of their pilots. Hayes explained the human approach to warfare during the post-battle briefing. We do not fight to minimize our losses. We fight to eliminate our enemies completely. When someone threatens our people, our families, our way of life, we do not negotiate or compromise. We destroy them. Over the following months, human tactics spread throughout the galactic fleet. The cold, calculated fury that humans brought to warfare proved effective against the Void Wraiths. For the first time since the war began, the enemy began to retreat across multiple fronts. Other species started to adopt human methods. The Kralliks began sending suicide ships against enemy formations. The Zephyrians developed weapons designed to cause maximum damage regardless of the cost to their own forces. The civilized approach to warfare that had dominated the galaxy for millions of years gave way to something much more brutal. The tide of the war turned as more species embraced the human way of fighting. The Void Wraiths found themselves facing enemies who would sacrifice everything to achieve victory. Systems that had been lost were retaken through attacks that would have been considered war crimes in peacetime. Hayes watched the transformation of the galactic military with mixed feelings. The humans had given the galaxy the tools it needed to win the war, but those tools were changing the very nature of the species using them. The war ended 18 months after Hayes arrived at the front. The last Void Wraith ship was destroyed, in a battle that saw 3 entire fleets sacrifice themselves to prevent a single enemy vessel from escaping. The galaxy was safe, but it was no longer the same place it had been before the humans taught them how to fight. Hayes filed her final report before returning to Earth. The galaxy has learned to fight like us, she wrote. I pray they never have to use these methods against each other. The victory celebration lasted for 3 months across the galaxy. Every species that had survived the Void War declared holidays in honor of their salvation. Parades filled the streets of 1,000 worlds. Songs were written about the brave, warriors who had saved civilization itself. But the humans did not celebrate. Commander Lisa Hayes packed her equipment aboard the cargo ship Freedom and prepared to leave the war zone. Her volunteers had already begun returning to Earth, carrying with them memories of battles that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Admiral Vex Hari of the Council Fleet came to see her off. The alien commander had fought alongside Hayes for over a year and had developed deep respect for human military abilities. The Council wishes to offer Earth full membership, Admiral Vex Hari said. Your species has earned a place among the galaxy's greatest powers. We want you to help us maintain the peace we have fought so hard to achieve. Hayes looked out through the ship's viewport at the assembled galactic fleet. Hundreds of vessels, From dozens of species floated in formation, their hulls scarred from battle but their crews victorious. They had learned to fight like humans, and it had saved them all. "Thank you for the offer," Hayes replied, "but we will be going home now." "I do not understand," Admiral Vexhari said. "Your people have proven themselves to be the galaxy's greatest warriors. Why would you choose to isolate yourselves?" Hayes turned away from the viewport and faced the alien commander. "Because we have seen what our way of fighting does to other species. You were once civilized people who valued life and sought peaceful solutions to problems. Look what you have become." The Admiral's tentacles moved in what Hayes had learned was a gesture of confusion. "We became survivors. We learned to defend ourselves against those who would destroy us." "You learned to fight like humans," Hayes corrected, "and that is something no species should have to do unless they have no other choice." Colonel Ryan Parker was the last human military advisor to work with the Galactic Fleet. He had stayed behind after Hayes departed to help train the alien forces in human tactics. For 6 months, he worked with commanders from across the galaxy, teaching them the brutal efficiency that had won the war. Parker watched with growing concern as the species around him changed. The Kralliks, once proud warriors who fought with honor and dignity, began to speak of enemies as things to be completely destroyed rather than defeated. The Zephyrians, who had been known for their wisdom and patience, started planning attacks that showed no mercy to anyone who opposed them. The transformation was not limited to military leaders. Entire civilizations began to adopt human attitudes toward conflict. Disputes that had once been resolved through negotiation and compromise now escalated into wars of total destruction. The first sign of real trouble came during the Hegemony Collective, border wars. Two species that had been neighbors for thousands of years suddenly found themselves in a conflict over mining rights in a disputed system. In the past, such disagreements had been settled by the Council through diplomatic means. Instead, both sides mobilized their entire fleets and began a war that lasted 30 years. They fought with human tactics, seeking not just victory, but the complete elimination of their enemies. Entire planets were stripped of life. Civilian populations were targeted as legitimate military objectives. Neither side would accept anything less than total surrender. Parker filed report after report warning the Council about what was happening. "The human approach to warfare is like a disease," he wrote. "Once a species is exposed to it, they cannot return to their former methods of conflict resolution. We have made the galaxy more dangerous, not safer." The Council ignored his warnings. They were too impressed with their new military capabilities to worry about the long-term consequences. Species that had never won a war in their history suddenly found themselves able to defeat enemies that had once seemed impossible to overcome. The Zephyrian Purge was the event that finally made everyone understand what Parker had been trying to tell them. A minor territorial dispute between two subspecies of Zephyrians escalated into a war of genocide. The Crystal Zephyrians, using tactics learned from humans, systematically eliminated every member of the gas Zephyrians they could find. In 6 months, an entire branch of one of the galaxy's oldest species was extinct. The survivors numbered in the hundreds, scattered across refugee camps throughout the inner systems. A people who had existed for millions of years were gone forever because their relatives had learned to fight like humans. Parker submitted his final report to the Council and requested permission to return to Earth. "The humans saved you from the Void Wraiths," he wrote, "but they also gave you something that may destroy you in the end. The ability to hate your enemies so completely that you will not stop until they no longer exist." When Parker arrived back, on Earth he found that human leaders had been watching galactic events with growing alarm. The reports of increasingly brutal conflicts between species that had once been peaceful neighbors convinced them that their decision to stay out of galactic politics had been correct. President Carter met with Parker in the same United Nations building where the first galactic delegation had requested human assistance. The building looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. "The galaxy has become more violent since we helped them win the war," President Carter said. "Our military advisors report that every major conflict now uses tactics that we developed during the Void War." Parker nodded grimly. "They learned our methods too well." The problem is that once you start fighting like a human, it becomes very difficult to stop. Our enemies in the war were creatures of pure destruction who had to be completely eliminated. But now, they are using those same methods against each other. The decision was made at the highest levels of human government. Earth would withdraw from all galactic affairs. No more military advisors would be sent to help other species. No more human ships would join galactic fleets. The small blue planet would return to its quiet corner of space and hope that the galaxy could learn to control what humans had taught them. Parker's final message to the Galactic Council was simple, but memorable. You know where to find us if you need us, hope you don't. The humans sealed their borders and went back to their lives. They built cities, explored their own solar system, and tried to forget that they had once taught an entire galaxy how to wage war with absolute ruthlessness. The galaxy moved forward without them, but the empty seat protocol was established to honor what they had done. At every War Council meeting, one chair remained vacant. It served as both a tribute to the species that had saved them all and a reminder of the price that salvation had cost. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The humans stayed on their small world and minded their own business. The galaxy learned to live with the brutal efficiency they had taught it, though conflicts became more deadly and final resolutions more rare. The empty seat waited patiently, as it had for over 200 years. The humans had made it clear that they would only return if the galaxy faced another threat that required their unique approach to warfare. Most galactic leaders hoped that day would never come. They had seen what humans could do when they chose to fight, and they had learned what happened to species that fought like humans. But sometimes, when facing enemies that could not be reasoned with or defeated by conventional means, they found themselves staring at that empty chair and wondering if they should send another message to Earth. The Devourer crisis had reached a breaking point. 18 systems had fallen in the past month alone. Refugee ships filled every spaceport in the inner worlds. Panic spread through the galactic population as news of each new defeat reached the core systems. War Premier Yulnara looked around the War Council table at the assembled military leaders. These were the greatest tactical minds the galaxy had produced, commanders who had won countless battles against every known enemy. Yet they sat in frustrated silence as their traditional methods failed against the Devourers. Admiral Kextar pulled up the latest battle reports on his personal display. The 7th Fleet engaged the enemy at Proxima Station yesterday. We lost 43 ships and only destroyed 2 of theirs. The station was completely consumed. General Thex of the Iron Brotherhood added his own grim statistics. My robot. Legions are useless against them. The Devourers simply absorb the metal and use it to grow stronger. Every ship we lose makes them more powerful. The Devourers were unlike any enemy the galaxy had faced since the Void Wraiths. They appeared to be machines, but they grew and reproduced like living creatures. They consumed raw materials and energy, using everything they ate to build more of themselves. Traditional weapons had little effect because destroying one Devourer often provided materials for 2 more to be born. We need new tactics, said Admiral Yulnara. Everything we have tried has failed. Our conventional strategies are useless against an enemy that grows stronger with each battle. The War Council had been meeting for 6 hours without reaching any useful conclusions. Every strategy they proposed had already been tried and failed. The Devourers adapted to new weapons faster than the galaxy could develop them. Fleet Commander Zektal of the Outer Rim Defense Force had remained quiet throughout the meeting. He was younger than most of the other leaders, but he had studied military history more thoroughly than anyone else in the room. There is one option we have not discussed, he said finally. The other commanders turned to look at him. Speak, ordered War Premier Yulnara. Zektal gestured toward the empty chair at the table. We could ask the humans for help. The suggestion caused an immediate uproar. Several commanders began speaking at once, their voices mixing together, in a chaos of different languages and translation devices. Absolutely not, Admiral Kextar said loudly. The cure would be worse than the disease. Do you remember what happened after the Void War? The humans taught us to fight like savages, added General Thex. The galaxy has been more violent ever since. Entire species have been wiped out using their methods. Fleet Commander Zektal waited for the noise to die down before responding. The galaxy has also been alive ever since. Without human intervention, we would all have been consumed by the void wraiths. Perhaps some violence is better than complete extinction. War Premier Yulnara raised her hand for silence. The human question has been debated many times over the past 2 centuries. The consensus has always been that their methods are too dangerous to use except in the most extreme circumstances. What circumstances could be more extreme than this? Zektal asked. The Devourers are unstoppable. They will consume everything in the galaxy if we do not find a way to defeat them. Is preserving our civilized approach to warfare worth the price of universal extinction? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every being in the Great Hall knew the answer, but none wanted to speak it aloud. Admiral Vex Hari, now ancient, beyond most species' lifespans, struggled to his feet. He had been present during the first human contact and had witnessed their methods firsthand. His voice carried the weight of centuries when he spoke. I fought alongside Commander Hayes during the Void War, he said slowly. I watched human pilots fly their ships directly into enemy formations, trading their lives for tactical advantage. I saw them hunt the void wraiths through every corner of the galaxy until not a single enemy remained alive. He paused and looked around the table at each military leader. The humans do not fight wars, they fight crusades. When they decide that something must be destroyed, they pursue that goal with absolute dedication until their enemy ceases to exist. That is both their greatest strength and their most terrifying quality. Then why should we invite them back? Asked Admiral Kekstar. Because, Admiral Vex Hari replied, the Devourers are exactly the kind of enemy that requires that approach. They cannot be negotiated with, reasoned with, or contained. They can only be completely eliminated. And there is no species in the galaxy better at complete elimination than the humans. The debate continued for another 3 hours. Arguments were made for and against contacting Earth. Some commanders pointed out that humanity had made it clear they wanted to be left alone. Others argued that the galaxy's survival was more important than respecting human wishes. Finally, War Premier Yulnara called for a formal vote. All in favor of sending a delegation to Earth to request assistance with the Devourer crisis. One by one, hands and appendages were raised around the table. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 10 of the 12 military leaders voted to contact the humans. Admiral Kekstar, who had voted against the proposal, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Who will we send? The humans have ignored every diplomatic contact for over 200 years. They have made it clear that they do not want to be involved in galactic affairs. We will send someone they cannot ignore, War Premier Yulnara replied. Someone who fought alongside them during the Void War and understands their methods. Admiral Vex Hari nodded slowly. I will go. I am old enough to remember what they did for us, and old enough not to care if they kill me for disturbing their peace. The Great Hall fell silent as the magnitude of the decision sank in. For the first time in over 2 centuries, the galaxy was going to break the informal treaty that kept humanity isolated from galactic affairs. 3 days later, a single ship departed from the galactic core and headed toward the outer rim. Admiral Vex Hari traveled alone in a small diplomatic vessel, carrying a message that could determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. The ship's destination was a small yellow star in a quiet corner of space. The third planet of that system housed 7 billion humans who had no idea that their galaxy was facing extinction. They went about their daily lives, unaware that the most powerful military leaders in known space had voted to ask for their help once again. The empty seat at the War Council table remained vacant as it had for centuries. But for the first time since the Void War ended, there was a real possibility that it might be occupied again. On Earth, telescopes detected the approaching ship when it was still weeks away from the solar system. Human space defense systems came online for the first time in decades. Military leaders who had never expected to face a galactic crisis prepared for the possibility that their long isolation was about to end. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see if the humans would answer the call. The Devourers continued their relentless advance, consuming everything in their path. Time was running out for everyone. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, the empty chair waited patiently for an answer that would determine whether civilization itself would survive or be devoured by an enemy that knew no mercy. The humans would decide for themselves whether the galaxy's latest crisis was worth their time, as they always had.